how you use them.
T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Biz Doc Podcast. Boy, we got some stuff this week I think is going to be very, very interesting. Interesting little rundown and a case study where I'm going to only go so deep, and I'm going to save a deep dive case study for another time. So let's go talk about what we got going. First of all, we have got some stats on wages versus inflation. We're going to go through that. The statistics lie. The reality for Americans is different. So check that out. That's first up. Then we're going to roll into a short case study on BYD. That is the Chinese electric vehicle company, Chinese EVs. Believe it or not, they just passed Tesla a little bit in the fourth quarter, and we're going to go dive into it, let you know why, and I'm going to save a really deep dive into BYD for another time, but they're in the headlines. They just passed Tesla. We're going to find out what that's all about. So first, interesting stuff here. Very interesting stuff is going on with wage growth versus inflation growth. So it's like inflation goes up, it makes life more expensive. Gas goes up in price, comes down in price. But sometimes things at the grocery store go up in price and they don't come back. Milk went down. Remember they were talking about eggs for a long time 2 years ago being really expensive. And if you owned a dozen eggs, you were rich. And all those memes that went out about that. Well, other things at the grocery store and basic things have not come down. And that's an example of inflation is down, and they say, oh, it's great, energy is down. And it is great that energy is down. It is great that natural gas and gasoline and fuel oil prices are back down as we're in the middle of winter now here in the United States. And that takes a lot of pressure off of consumers, especially the Midwest and the Northeast. Northeast especially, a lot of cities back there still use fuel oil in their heaters. And so when that's up in price, it makes it very expensive, especially if people are retired up there. So some things come back down, which is good, but other things go up and don't come back down. Coffee and other things went up in price or still up in price, and that's permanent inflation effect. So on the other side, you're like, well, when do I get my raise, and does my income kind of follow that or chase it? Well, let's take a look. We're going to pop up this first chart. This is average hourly earnings percent going up as represented by the blue line, and inflation represented by the orange line. And isn't it interesting? From 2016 to 2020, inflation stayed, 2% was a peak in 18, 19, end of 2020. And then we all know what happened at the very end of 2020, going through 2021, inflation went crazy. Everything went up. All the stuff I was just talking about went up, and it was very hard on Americans. Well, the other side of it was what happened to earnings? Well, during COVID, we had a spike in earnings. Remember, because we had a little bit of a shortage of labor, and so people were like going into their boss and saying, if you don't give me a raise, I'm going to go work for this company because I can work from home, bring my dog to work. See what I did there? Your dog is already home. And go through all that, and there was a wage spike, and there was like a situation where people were demanding and getting sudden raises. So for part of 2020, we had this big spike in wages. But then we had, going end of 2021, we had wages not going up as people were coming back to work. Work from home, suddenly became work from here, meaning your desk. And many, many companies started asking people to come back, 3 days, 4 days a week. You heard that from Disney, you heard it from Amazon. And hey, we want to check it out. We heard other people like Google saying, hey, we're using some systems to check on people to make sure you're actually working from home. But other people are saying, nah, all this stuff about productivity at home, maybe somebody is productive at home if they're just processing things, like processing insurance policies. Okay, maybe you are more productive from home, maybe. But other people came out, such as Verizon Media, and there was a guy, his name was Tim Armstrong, I think it was. Verizon Media comes out and says, hey, now people are complaining about get promoted. And I'm like, how do I promote you if you're working from home and you're not bonding with your team and you're not lifting them up? How does that work? And all that madness going back and forth, that was all affecting wages, and wages stopped growing so much. So then you see the inflation spike. So when it all sorts out, right now, inflation is back down. The amount of inflation is below the growth in wages. Wages are a little bit above. which means that's the way it was from 2016, 17, 18, and 19, that the inflation rate, which was under 2% at those days, maybe a little bit over, and the hourly earnings was staying a little bit ahead of that, which meant that Americans were marginally staying ahead of the game. Maybe. Remember, this is a cumulative effect. Gasoline goes up, comes back down. Milk may go up, but it comes back down. But a lot of other things go up in expense and they stay at their new level, which means if your wage didn't come up, you're no longer able to afford it. So check out this next chart. What I did is I went and dug into, and we found from the St. Louis Fed, we found the following. Take a look at this from 2019 all the way to 2023. So the average hourly wage, and remember, this is everybody. So this may seem high. This is not like minimum wage, but the average wage in America was $34.27 an hour right now. And if you go back to 2020, it was, 28, I think beginning of 2020, you can see on this chart, I think the actual number was $28.75 an hour. So it's gone $28.75 to $34.27, up about 19%. Then I did an inflation calculator. So if wages went up about 19% from $28.75 to $34.27 per hour, average for everybody, from minimum wage people all the way up to salary people, that's a national average. Okay, 19% during that time. But what did inflation do? Guess what? Inflation also went up 19%. So that if $100 in January 2020 would have cost you $119 in November of 2023, the last month, right at the end of last year, because we're right here at the beginning of January. So that's a recent stat, because it takes time for the government to get this together. It takes time for the government to get a lot of shit together. But anyway, it's also 19%. But then I dug in a little deeper, and I don't have a chart for that, but I'm going to show you what I found out. I found out that, okay, 19% to everybody, but how did that affect like people making less than 50 grand a year? And I found out that 50 grand is about the number where half of America makes 50 grand a year or less, with a nominal mean in there of about $38,000. Because remember, there's a lot of minimum wage students, there's a lot of people working part-time, but half of America makes less than 50 grand a year. And I found that the half of America that made less than 50 grand a year, they didn't benefit like this. Their wages are only up for that sector, as I like to say, that cohort, which is a fancy name for a group of people, was only up about 15%. Aha, that means that inflation is ahead of them and was ahead of them by 4 or 5 points, but that doesn't count everything because certain people get hit differently. People that commute a long way get hit harder on gasoline. People that live in the Northeast get hit harder on fuel oil, on the energy side, and those fortunately are coming down. But what it says is that the American worker, half the United States, is behind the curve on wage growth versus inflation. So when you hear on TV that they're saying, oh, well, wage growth is finally ahead of inflation. It may be ahead of inflation now, but you have to look at what was the total effect. And over those 3 years, what amount of increase in income did those people get versus the permanent inflation on things that aren't coming back down in price? And guess what? The American worker is behind. And let's take a look at this. $1 trillion in credit card debt was crossed in October. I think it was mid-October. $1 trillion in credit card debt. During COVID, when everybody got checks from the government, it got pushed down to below half a trillion, like 500 billion. But it went zooming up as everybody went back to work and COVID was over in 2022, 2023. And now Americans in October 2023 crossed $1 trillion of credit card debt. Then they also started using BNPL, buy now, pay later. A lot of times you can click it from Best Buy, from Amazon, from a lot of places. So you don't use a credit card, you use buy now, pay later, and it's an easy credit check. It's very quick, but it doesn't show up on your credit report. And the stats have just come out. January 10th, the stats came out. 41% of the buy now, pay later since Black Friday, which is right there, that big shopping day around Thanksgiving. Guess what? The payments are late. And this is only supposed to be a 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 month, but it's supposed to be short. And the interest rate, if you're late, goes way up. You miss a payment, the interest rate goes up. It's like 50%. It's massive. It's huge. So guess what this is showing? Wage growth is behind inflation. And people revved up the credit cards after COVID, used buy now, pay later. So a lot of things we hear, hey, the stock market's up this hub. You know what? For the lower half of America, under $50,000, it's not up. It's in tough places. Why is this important for you and me? If you employ people and you have a business, there's never been a better time to help coach people on financial sanity. And they'll take a look at it and say, you know, the raises you give to people, do you have some great workers, some great people at your company? Can you afford to give them a 5, 6, or 7% raise for good performance, but also keeping an eye on the outside world and says, man, I know people could use a little more help. If you're able to do that, then you're part of the solution and you're part of protecting the good people that are part of your company. So that's a quick economic lesson and what the realities are in front of us and how, oh my goodness, when government is feeding stats and feeding things to the media to talk about Bidenomics and how everything is coming back and how things are great, flip off your television because it's BS. The lower half of America is squeezed, it's got more credit card debt than they have, and is in a tough space. And it makes you wonder, you know, what do I invest in? What do I do? Well, before we go to the case study, we've got this from our good friends at Hartford Gold. Businesses today are facing a rough world. Banks are failing, inflation is never ending, and a looming recession threatens to wipe out stock value. There's still risk of a recession in 2024. All of that's bad for business, but it's even worse for retirement funds. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents that are in your life, they're getting ready to retire, and they have to depend on those funds. To make things worse, the government is targeting 401ks and IRAs with new taxes to pay for what you and I know, the social justice agenda and things that are going on. And you don't have to be a liberal or conservative on any side of the aisle to understand that that's real and it affects everybody when they implement it. But the good news, the very good news, is there's a way to help protect your financial future. Precious metals is an option. American Hartford Gold will ship physical gold and silver directly to your door, or they can set you up with a gold IRA. A gold IRA has the potential to shield your wealth from this economic meltdown. And the best part is this method is tax-free and penalty-free when you think about penalties if you withdraw prematurely from IRAs. And analysts are predicting that gold could be headed to all-time highs. So if you have retirement funds that you cannot afford to lose, now is the time to call the only precious metal dealer that I personally trust at this time, American Hartford Gold. They'll show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your portfolio with physical gold and silver. With the finest products, amazing customer service, and a buyback commitment, American Hartford Gold has earned a 5-star rating from thousands of reviews online and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. Tell them the Biz Doc sent you or you heard about it here on the Biz Doc Podcast, and they'll give you $5,000 of free silver on your first order. You can click the link in the description for the podcast or call this number, 866-535-0767. Again, that's 866-535-0767, or even easier, you can text BIZ. That's like me, B-I-Z, text BIZ to 65532. Again, text BIZ to 65532, or call 866-535-0767 to connect with American Hartford Gold. All right. Thank you to American Hartford Gold for being our sponsor. Now I'm going to take my vault, unlock your brain with a vault. This is my favorite, you know it, Black Cherry. And I'm going to go to Studio B, find my board, and do the BYD case study. And let's see if we can unlock your brain on some interesting things about EVs in China as I take a big sip in my vault to unlock my brain, and see you there. All right. I found my board. At least the door was unlocked this time. Remember last week I was pounding on the door? It's kind of funny. All right, here we go. Got my vault. Unlock your brain with a vault. And now I'm going to unlock your brain on BYD. So let's talk about it. there's been a lot of headlines now, and I've even talked to some of my friends who are fairly up on things, and they've said, hey, what is this BYD company in China that's about to pass Tesla? And I said, well, that's been a long time coming. They said, I guess I haven't been paying attention, haven't been in the market for cars, just haven't been reading it. There's so much else to do in life. Totally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us down a quick trip on BYD, how they're competing with Tesla and where they are right now. But then I'm going to do a big case study, like a 30-minute case study, really dive into it, because they get a lot of help from the Chinese government that, is pulling buttons, pulling levers, pushing buttons, trying to help their own companies, which I understand, but they do it in such a way as this kind of unfair trade too. I'm going to dive into all that. But today, where did they come from? What's going on now? What are the cars that are out there and how are they competing with Tesla? So let's dive in. All right, Q Neil Diamond, where it began. All right, this guy is a founder, Wang Xuanfu, and I hope I pronounced that right. I want to be completely respectful with international names and things, so I'm not even going to try this one, but they acquired this auto company here, the unpronounceable company, and I just don't want to butcher it, and I don't want anybody to make fun of it in the comments, but that is the exact spelling of who they bought. So they buy that, and it becomes BYD Auto. And that's 2003. 2005, they come out with the BYD F3. It was one of the first cars that they came out with. Now remember, they weren't just doing EVs. They were trying to do energy efficient, so they had hybrids. You can buy hybrids here in the United States. It has a small motor and battery pack. And so you get this hybrid mechanism, and you get much better gas mileage, but you're not screwed if the battery runs dead because it has a little motor in it. So in 2008, BYD F3DM, that's the plug-in hybrid. See, so this was a car, this was a plug-in hybrid. You see what's happening here. They had a vision for EVs. Then in 2009, ta-da, the BYD E6, which was full battery, means plug it in, charge it, it's only a battery vehicle. Reasonable looking car right there. You can see it right there. That's a picture from their own website of the vehicle at the time. So that's where it began. This gentleman, they acquire a company. They're starting with regular cars. They start moving into EVs. So, and it's a Chinese company most Americans don't think about and don't know about. Well, let's see what happened. They would go from 2008 to 2020, 12 years developing technology, developing battery technology and getting there. But from 2020, during COVID, to 2023, it's like they exploded on the scene out of nowhere. Well, no, they were an overnight sensation, 12 years in the making while they were building. I'm going to cover that on a deeper case study. But right now, spin forward to 2020. 2020, they introduce the BYD Han. Guess what? Four-door car, very sleek looking. Not sleek like the Tesla Model S, but nonetheless a really good looking car. And they entered Europe. I think the first place they entered Europe was Norway. So they were going one country at a time, but now everybody in Europe is saying, hey, there's Teslas, but what? BYD, and they start in Norway. 2021, this is, Daimler AG they had a stake in the company that was like 50%. That gets reduced to 10%. Now, this was also being driven by the Chinese government that wanted less foreign ownership. And that means that BYD Auto then controlled 90% of their company. So early partnerships get bought out, and they announce more vehicles. The Denza minivan, good looking minivan there. The typical large front fascia with the solid area, there's no radiators up there, so it's just pushing wind out of the way, and there's a lot of sensors for automated cruise control, ultimately heading toward self-driving options and things like that, or automatic lane change assist and whatnot. Anyway, here comes the Denza minivan. Then 2022, they announced Platform 3.0. That was the 3.0 platform in terms of technology and software and battery technology to make the cars go further, be a little zippier, because EVs are pretty quick. I've surprised a couple people with my my Fisker Ocean One, turning a 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, which is pretty crazy. I've surprised some supercar people, and I don't make noise. And it looks like a little Land Rover Evoque, which tends to flip people out. What the hell was that thing? Well, these are what EVs do. instant torque in those electric motors. So Platform 3.0 comes out in 2022, and they said, and now the car's coming on it, we're going to be able to go faster with more efficient batteries, and we're going to head towards self-driving and a lot of things like that. 2023, they announced the Seagull, the smallest and cheapest BYD car to date. Look at that. That's like what you would see in Europe. You've seen in Europe, those little tiny four-door cars running around the streets. You obviously see some of those in Japan. Well, they put that out. And Platform 3.0 is out. And their marketing and their sales engine is out. And they've spent all this time reducing the internal cost so that they can get the cheapness into the consumer in the form of a low price. And they sell 200,000 of them in 7 months, meaning they are now a big gorilla in the EV space. Not only are they able to design and put cars out there, Lucid does that, Rivian does that, Fisker does that, but none of those three have been able to manufacture those kind of numbers. Fisker says it will in 2 years, but let's see if they get there. They're suffering right now and their stock's way down. Rivian says they're going to get there. Yeah, And first of all, let's get more of those trucks on the road. They're great trucks. You've seen the Rivian truck, but they're just not able to get up this kind of volume, nor is Lucid. So guess what? Tesla and BYD are the big boys. So you can see they didn't really come out of nowhere. They were spent a decade getting all the way up to this Platform 3.0 to make all these cars a reality, and they proved it with, hey, we sold 200,000 of them in 7 months, so that little Seagull. Whoa. It also marked a time where they were talking about energy efficiency, and they've announced all of their future models of cars are named after marine animals and environmental things. So they're thinking battery, less fossil fuel, naming it after marine animals and stuff, kind of coming around a lot of marketing around Earth and energy efficiency and clean energy. There you go. So they also make an announcement. BYD says, Chinese EV makers unite. Our enemy is the world. It's us versus the world. And the world really means Tesla, because they're the one that's generating a lot of volume. A lot of other car makers are coming behind it, but Tesla is still pumping out the numbers. So guess what? Now they're also, this is China taking steps and saying, here we come. So let's check the start history. They have, on the US stock market, they have an ADR, which is short American Depository Receipts, but what that really means, this is a reflection that you can buy here in the United States of the stock that's overseas. And take a look. All those new model cars, 2020, looky here. Pops all the way up, $53.68 today, and up $50 or 1,395% all time from a very low starting point. See, they spent all this time building these cars, getting it ready, and then they blow out and they're starting to push out numbers there. Look what it does to the stock price. So now they have real market presence. And this is a Hong Kong exchange, I believe, and this is the ADR represented here in the United States. So the Tesla feud, is it a feud? It's more than a feud. It's about world domination. And it's not Tesla fighting with GM, Ford, and Stellantis. Remember, you have to still get used to Stellantis because that's the Chrysler Group. Their new brand name from about a year ago, Stellantis. It's BYD, Tesla. That's where the war is. And let's take a look. Q3 of last year. So over there, they call them BEVs, battery electric vehicles. We just call them EVs, electric vehicles, because over there, there's hybrids that you still plug in and that have an engine and recirculative energy, charges batteries, true hybrids, and then battery electric vehicles. So they differentiate it, say BEVs. So whenever you see articles talking about BYD, if they say BEV, that's pure electric, just like a Tesla. It's got a battery inside it. It's got to be plugged in to recharge. So Tesla sold 435,000 of them in Q3. BYD sold 432,000. So it's basically a tie. And BYD is up 70% for that year. And Tesla's were up about 46%. And what's more, in Q4, BYD sold 526, Tesla sold 44. This is the first time with high volume EVs that Tesla's not number one. Chinese BYD is number one. So this is going on. Now remember, Tesla may be a global company, but this is an American company. You know, started here in America, and the Gigafactory and the things Tesla have is here. So you would imagine that our governors and our legislators and people would want to help. Well, unfortunately, Elon Musk also owns X, formerly Twitter, and a lot of those bureaucrats and folks don't like that because he promotes free speech, and you know, they want to. We know how the government works. They want to cancel each other. This side wants to cancel this side wants to cancel this side. And there's Elon Musk in the middle saying, no, everybody, we have a free speech platform. Well, people get pissed off about that. Why is that important? Check this out. Gavin Newsom, governor of California, goes over to visit China, and this is BYD's super high-end, it's called the Yangwang U8. And so over there, you know, Gavin Newsom says, wow, this is great. This is like $140,000, $150,000 SUV in US dollars. And he's like, I'll take two of these. Now, was he joking around? Did he really order two? Whatever it is, this thing is supposedly not going to be in the United States. But Gavin Newsom's going over there trying to look presidential and everything. And the Chinese are over there yanking his wang, you know, while he's driving a Yang Wang. And they're trying to convince him that he should be kind of doing things and helping them. Well, check this out. There is a U.S. governor sitting in a Chinese vehicle, a company that does trade practices against U.S. companies. And he's like, hey, I'll take two of them, when he should be supporting, you know, American companies like Tesla and the gigafactories and all the Americans that are employed. And there's a bunch of Americans called Californians living in California who work for Tesla. So this kind of crap doesn't help. And this is an example of how the political realm, you know, America first, it's sometimes America last. But the whole point I'm making here is this doesn't help when you've got an American company, Tesla, trying to compete with a Chinese company. Come on now, guys. And your governor of one of your larger states, I'll take two. Please, give me a break. So what's next? Well, this year, Motley Fool just came out and they said that they were looking at the EV stocks. They said there's two stocks to buy. You know, BYD, buy the ADR over here in the US, or Tesla, and one to avoid. The one to avoid, they said, was Lucid. And you can go back and look at my Lucid case study, and you can see why maybe you should avoid that. It's not my opinion. There's a lot of stuff going on there to avoid. Then, Tesla versus BYD. Analysts prefer one of them, giving BYD a 70% upside. So there it is. You've even got analysts looking at it now saying, hey man, you know, America first, world first, whatever it is, I'm telling you, I'm analyzing it, and BYD, I think, has got 70% upside coming up in the next 2 years. That's pretty amazing. Bloomberg comes out. Tesla falls behind China's BYD in quarterly EV sales as growth slows. So there is that number. BYD sold 526,000 to 44 in Q4, and Tesla exceeds. And so they're saying all this and saying Tesla falls behind when Tesla exceeds the annual target. They beat their numbers. How many years were they not beating their numbers because they needed to get the factories going, get momentum going on there? And we were like, oh, Elon Musk gave a number and he didn't meet it. Well, now he beats his number, but BYD is revved up and they're at speed and they're in front of him. So there you have it. A lot of headlines, and all these headlines here that are going on, these are all, that's January 10th, this is January 8th. This one, I believe, was January 10th as well, Bloomberg. So all these headlines are out there, and a lot of you, thank you very much for your comments. Thank you for your DMs on X, asking me, why don't you do a quick overview of BYD? Sure like to know what's going on. And I'm getting ready to do a special edition case study where I'm going to take a deep dive and tear down into BYD, including the international trade issues on how they make it unfair for all kinds of American companies. Even if you don't like Tesla, but you're here in America and you want to see how Ford and GM are supposed to be competing around the world, you're going to see what the Chinese are doing to help stop that and make it not a fair fight of your product, your price versus my product. And that's coming soon. But this, I hope I've unpacked for you what's going on right now with this Tesla versus BYD headlines we've been seeing. So, lessons for you and me. And I think I got my slides all wonky this week, so let me just pop them all up here. All right, there we go. First of all, regardless of where you are, unless you're just a plumber doing business in Kansas City, Missouri or something, international is everywhere. The internet is inherently international. So whatever you do, suppliers, competitors, know your sector and understand how international impacts it. There's a lot of people out there that didn't see BYD coming. Oh, sure, they knew what was going on, but from 2020 to 2023, I've read a lot of analyst reports that say they frankly are super surprised that in those 36 months, how fast BYD has moved, the introduction of the Seagull, selling 200,000 of them in 7 months. People said they saw BYD coming, but they didn't see them coming this fast over this 36 months. Well, they've been building momentum behind the scene, and here they come. Well, if you're in a sector and you're something where international will be a part of it, know how quickly it can happen. Next, if you're a leader and you're not even in international, be paranoid. There's a great book you can read by Andy Grove, who was one of the leading executives, he's passed away now, of early Intel that made chips for our computers. And not too many years ago, you would see Intel inside was a symbol of quality. You could trust that computer because the Intel chip was so good. Well, Andy Grove wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive, and paranoia can be your friend. Paranoia doesn't have to be like nervousness and everything, but you should be paranoid about what's happening and be aware and taking time every month to really dive into things, and in your news every week, making sure you've got news scrapes or searches or notifications on certain news topics so that you could just be aware of what's going on. Job one is to run your company and drive hard every waking moment. However, job two is to be planning for the future, and if you're the CEO and you're in charge of it, being a little paranoid and always being on top of news will help you. Again, even if you are operating a t-shirt company in Berlin or a small tech company in the United States and you think there aren't competitors around you, there are. Be paranoid about what people are doing. I had a great conversation with a guy today, Giorgio, and he is in Australia, and he was telling me about his business and what's going on, and there's been a dramatic change for his business that he's paying attention to in his ability to purchase some parts at lower cost internationally. Now, I'm not going to disclose his business and stuff because I don't want to tip off any of his competitors, but he's on the ball and he's looking for opportunities, and he is about to reduce some of his costs significantly to keep giving his Australian customers great product. That's an example of being paranoid and being aware of international so that you can be reacting on the benefit of your company. And again, you could be operating a t-shirt company in Berlin. Can you get ink cheaper internationally? Always keep your eyes out. So when I say think outside the box, you hear that said a lot, change it to think outside the country. Are there customers that you could get out there? Are there supplies you could get out there? Options, options, options. It's a global world, and the lesson here is you see how fast BYD changed and revved up. Well, things could happen to you, regardless of how small you are and what kind of a company you are. So take time to pay attention. I hope those lessons for you and me are useful, if only to kind of spur you to be a data-driven, news consumer, so that being aware of your sector and that things could affect your company. And that, my friends, is the quick case study on BYD to answer the question, what is up with all these recent headlines and what is going on with them versus Tesla? And I hope that answered it for you to see what's happening, as well as to see what one of our bonehead governors is actually doing, going internationally and supporting international companies versus supporting American companies and American jobs. So I hope that was helpful to you. And as I promised, in the coming months, I'm going to do a big teardown on BYD, take you through the deeper history and the things that they've done recently. And with that, I'm going to go back, take my vault here. I hope that unlocked your brain, and let's go wrap up. All right. I hope you enjoyed that. I thought you would, and I hope you did. BYD, I'm going to do a big dive case study on it and how the Chinese government is allowing them to do price fixing and price dumping, a lot of things that Europe has been complaining about. And we'll dive in even deeper. But this sets the stage and gives you a great framework for the competition with Tesla and what's happening with the two largest EV makers in the world, Tesla and BYD. Now, if you like this, you can go back to some recent case studies from the Biz Doc on Lucid, so you can check that out about an EV company that's had its challenges and learn more and come along. As I like to say, I'm Tom Elser with the Biz Doc, and I hope I left you better than I found you.